Perfect song to begin today. Great is thy faithfulness. Dear friends, we are gathered together to remember, to celebrate, to comfort, to share, and continuing the life and ministry of David Arthur Caldwell. We all knew him as Dave. There are some gatherings together that feel like they are happening too soon, and this is one of those times. Dave leaves some big shoes to fill in ministry and some big holes in our hearts. Our hearts will never quite be the same, but it is up to us to share in memory, to share the stories, and to share the wisdom with each other to comfort our broken hearts. Dave was a true disciple of Christ in every sense of those words. He lived it. He ministered in that way. And there is a depth of loss in our lives, and particularly in this congregation. Dave loved all things Christian Temple, and this congregation loved Dave. For those who are visiting today, to remember, welcome. Your presence makes this day even more meaningful. Dave carefully crafted poems, papers, sermons, pastoral writings, and even calls to worship. So you are invited to stand in body or spirit for this call to worship that Dave chose, and then remain standing for our opening hymn. Will you join with me? I lift my eyes to the hills. From where will my help come?
My help comes from the Lord, who made heaven and earth.
The Lord will keep you from all evil. God will keep your life. The Lord will keep your going out and your coming in from this time on and forevermore. Will you pray with me? Loving God, you have shared with each of us the life of Dave Caldwell. Thank you. His life and his friendship was a true gift. Bless this time as we remember together. Comfort each of us, especially Dave's family, in this time of grief. Be present with each of us in the days and months and years to come as we remember, weep, laugh, smile, and sing. These things we ask in your name. Amen.
Good morning, friends. It is an honor to be here this morning to share a few words about my dear friend, David Caldwell. Dave. Now, there are folk in this room who know Dave from a variety of different settings. And I know that I will not say everything that needs to be said. So don't correct me while I'm up here. But you will have an opportunity following the service to share together in a time of fellowship in the fellowship hall here. And that's where I encourage people to engage in what I call sacred gossip. That you tell the stories that haven't been told here, that you talk about how what Dave has meant to you, how he has influenced you and enriched you. Because everyone here has been touched and blessed by this good life. Last weekend, I was at a mass at a school that two of my grandchildren attend, and there was an quotation from Augustine in the bulletin that says, "The angels surround and protect the priest at Mass." I'd like to badly paraphrase that and say, may we be surrounded by loving angels as we celebrate the life of the Reverend David Arthur Caldwell. Now, as I begin, I want to bring you greetings from our region. Our regional moderator is the Reverend Terry McClellan, and she has asked me to extend greetings from her, as well as the other 37 congregations within the Christian Church capital area, in which this congregation itself is part of the heart of our capital area region. And we share your sorrow, we share your loss, but most of all, we have all shared the love that we've known in Dave Caldwell. You know, there on the back of the program is a short obituary, and I'll share a bit of that. Dave Caldwell, 79 years of age. You know, Dave has let me down. I always asked him to be at least 2 years older than me. And that's not so. I missed that communications we would have had. Dave was born on March 25th of 1943 in St. Louis, of which he spoke highly of his being raised there by his parents, Clyde and Mildred King Caldwell. He was the youngest of 4 boys, longtime member of the Union Avenue Christian Church, which is a significant church within our life of our denomination. He was involved in Scouts, receiving his Eagle Scout Award at the age of 16, and was involved in scouting through his whole life. He was a graduate of Missouri Valley College and then Christian Theological Seminary. We used to debate which was the more significant seminary, but we both agree they were all good. They have created and educated wonderful ministers in our denomination. Dave spent a career here in the capital area, 40 years, serving 4 different churches. A church in Savage, Maryland, church in Vienna, Antioch Christian Church, National City Christian Church, and then retiring from First Christian Church in Baltimore. Dave was predeceased by his dear Christina Joy Brinkman, and is survived by sons Michael Gordon, Kara, John David McAllister, and husband Ross, and as well his granddaughter Julia Drew. Gathered together. Today we remember a life that is filled with legacies. A legacy of love, a legacy of family, a legacy of friends who loved him dearly, and a legacy of those who have been touched by David's faith and spirit. We have all, as we gather here, I hope we are focusing a bit on how David has touched our lives and blessed our lives and enriched us, because he has. I want to share with you the thought that a life is more than the sum of all those who know him. I'll give you an example. I had no idea what that harmonica stuff was all about. He never pulled it out and played it for me. I don't know, but that's something I learned yesterday and today. Here's his greatest legacy right here. Family. Oh, how he loved you. With all of his heart, with all of his energy, and with all of he loved you so much. He took pride in all you've done, your accomplishments, your work through the years, always willing to share where you are in life. We even have a junior in college here. God bless you. We're here today because we could be no other place. In terms of family, you are blessed with a richness of faith, blessed with a richness of hope. And on a personal note, Deborah and I were at the wedding of Chris and David. And we have grown even closer over the years since then. Oh, David was committed to his family and all that there are, all that it means. David was an educated man. I've already shared Missouri Valley College and Christian Theological Seminary. David loved to read. David loved to study. He was a lifelong learner, always trying to find what would be next, what I could focus on. We shared some wonderful times together over the years at Bethany College, which was the host center for the East Coast for our Scott lectures. And they would be for several days, and Dave would be there, Fred Harris would be there, Deborah and I would be there, and just wonderful opportunities to find the latest in what we are about. Oh, he loved to learn, and I know he participated in so many different educational experiences here at the temple, always enriching, always finding what's the next edge. Dave was a wonderful pastor, a wonderful minister. As I've said, he served 4 congregations in this region, and every congregation, there are people who remember when Dave was their pastor and how he brought God's love, Christ's peace, and Christ's hope to all of them. He is remembered by so many in those congregations, and that memory is another legacy that continues. Do you remember Pastor Caldwell and how well he served us? They valued his gifts to the church as well as to all Christians he encountered. Dave was a pastor. Now, there's a difference between a pastor and a minister. A pastor has this pastoral sense, taking care of being involved with the life of his congregation. You take serious, as a pastor, you take seriously the words that Christ provided to Peter as Peter was being renewed in his faith when he says, when he asked, do you love me? And Peter says, yes, I do. And he said, tend my sheep, feed my sheep, feed my sheep. And Dave knew how to feed the sheep of his congregations. We are all blessed by his pastoral care. Dave was a prophet. Dave was always on the edge. He was never ashamed to call himself a liberal. And I think you know that, don't you? He focused on the needs of others in our culture, focused on the needs of our society to make some movement in a positive, hope-filled direction for the benefit of all peoples. And he called the rest of us to care as well as he did. Dave was committed to the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. Beginnings of that were his home in Union Avenue Christian Church, a great influencing church in our denomination. And then his preparation for ministry at the seminary. He understood what it meant to be church. He understood what it meant to be a part of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. In this capital area, he served in a variety of ways. I first knew him as a leader of Christian Youth Fellowship conferences at Bethany Beach. My wife and a number of others here had probably been on the staff of those conferences, and Deborah would always come back and tell me what new thing and what new way and how Dave was able to process the experience for those involved. His sensitivity to the needs of teens. Oh, and young adults, he made a difference. In this region, he was the moderator in the late 80s. He served on the board of our Christian Church capital area for a number of years, always bringing a sense of wisdom and focus in all opportunities to serve. One thing I think most folk might not know is that for a little while, he served as the editor of our Christian Church Capital Area newsletter. And his writing skills have always been there. He was also a true disciple in that he was dedicated to the ecumenical movement. I remember his last responsibility was to be a part of the Central Maryland Ecumenical Council, and a place where we all come to a table with different experience and background, but also yearning to find that unifying force that would lead us into the beloved community. Now, he was also proud to be a part of the bad clergy. You all know about that? Sounds a lot worse than it really is. It's a bunch of preachers from the Baltimore area getting together for breakfast. But they loved that fellowship, and he loved that fellowship. And I once had when I was in another time of my life, I had the opportunity to be at that gathering, and it was at their home when Chris had prepared breakfast. And my golly, I thought we'd be there for days. He delighted in the fellowship that he shared with fellow clergy in our denomination, as well as other clergy and Christians throughout Christendom. You may not know this, but he also participated in a small group with me and several other retired clergy who tried to provide a support system for our previous regional ministers, to serve as a sounding board, to provide feedback. And he was a valuable part of that community. Well, another part of David's life is that he was so dedicated to scouting. As I've said, he received his Eagle Award at the age of 16. Bob Chance has been a scout leader for years and years and had the opportunity to work with Dave in a variety of councils and districts and to make that way of scouting possible. He never lost the values that he found in scouting. How many young men became Eagle Scouts? You're an Eagle Scout. Are you an Eagle Scout? 2 out of 3, okay. You know, that's pretty good batting. But how many Eagle Scouts are there who have been brought to that point, directed to that point by David's leadership? We are grateful for that. David shared a love of history. He was influenced, I think, by a Professor Lester McAllister, hence the name for John, who had been a professor at Bethany College and later at other institutions. And he and I shared memories 50 years ago. When I was in seminary taking Disciples of Christ history, my professor was Dr. Tucker, William Tucker. He wrote half the book called Journey in Faith, which was for a while the authoritative history. And Lester McAllister wrote the other half. I took my disciples' history while Tucker was writing his portion. And David and I talked about how Lester McAllister would act when he was writing his. Those were wonderful conversations we had about the history that we both shared. For a few years, David shared as a development officer for the Disciples of Christ Historical Society, which was then located in near Vanderbilt University in Nashville, which is now at Bethany College. But his purpose for serving there was to keep the word, the vision alive. We are a people of faith and hope, and we are a people who need to share our story. His love of history. Oh, he loved those trips to Williamsburg, didn't he? I think he had a permanent room there. I don't know. But he soaked it all in. He had his book project, Dear Virginia, Tales of Colonial Family. Who are the Hornblowers and the Lightfoot family? There's some books out there. Find out. But he created a novel of a history of a family from revolutionary times, the settlement of this nation through and through. And it was a joy to talk to him about that. He would get excited. It was fun. It was fun to hear. He was a poet. There's a book of poetry out on the table. I miss my poem at Christmas that he would send. He was a man of letters, books, poems, novels. We also might remember and suggest that his love of travel became not an obsession, but a priority for him. And you'll see out in the lobby the various places he did, cruises he'd been on and traveled, and how fun it was to deprogram him when he came back. Dave became a very active church member. I would say Dave was a statesman of our clergy. And I just want to say how he loved this congregation. He would always tell me, to tell us, Deborah and me. He loved the music. He loved the former pastor. And he was so excited about you two and what you are bringing to this congregation. And I know he blessed you and he encouraged you, and we are grateful that you are here. God bless you. David was a creator of worship. We read, he would use worship services, and I know that the last one he was to have helped with was the retirement for the Powells. It was a wonderful service. He didn't push himself on people, but he was ready to oblige and use his skills when asked. He had a background in finance, his development experience, his legacy of love, and I think that one of the most overriding characteristics of Dave was he was an encourager. If you did something right, he saw it, he'd tell you. He wouldn't do the opposite. He'd just tell you and find a way to help you move toward that good stuff. There's a lot more to be said, and I know that others have other stories, and I hope you'll share them at our luncheon. How will I remember him? I will remember, Deborah and I will remember his care and compassion for others. His inclusiveness. He set a big table, and there was room for everybody. I will miss our conversations about church, about preaching. One thing that I was jealous about Dave, over the years, I have been told by people that I have a soothing voice. And I interpreted that as, well, it's easy to fall asleep while you're preaching. But David had a big voice, and he used it well. Some people call it a stained glass voice. When he would speak, you were attracted to the voice, and then you were drawn into the message, because there was always a message there. Dave had a commanding voice with marvelous timbre. I will miss that. I will miss our lunches together that Deborah and I would come up about once a quarter at least and have lunch and go out for lunch after worship. The last few times had been at Charlestown, I'm sorry. And Charlestown, and enjoyed having lunch with the Moores as well, and that was our treat. Oh, I will miss him. I will miss my friend. I will miss his presence in my life. But I will hold in my mind and my heart all that he has given me. I have been blessed, made different and even better, because I have known the Reverend David Caldwell. Well done, good and most faithful servant. Amen.
John and I are using Dad's Bible. Psalm 23, a psalm of David. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I fear no evil. For you are with me, your rod and your staff. They comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord my whole life long. Love you, Grandpa Dave.
Romans 10, 8-15. But what does it say? The word is near you in your mouth and in your heart. That is the word of faith that we proclaim. Because if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For one believes with the heart, leading to righteousness, and one confesses with the mouth, leading to salvation. The scripture says, no one who believes in him will be put to shame. For there is no distinction between Jew and Greek, but the same Lord is Lord of all and is generous to all who call on him. For everyone who calls on him, the name of the Lord shall be saved. But how are they to call on one in whom they have not believed? And how are they to believe in one of whom they have never heard? And how are they to hear without someone to proclaim them? And how are they to proclaim him unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news.
From the Revelation to John. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, see, the home of God is among mortals. He will dwell with them as their God. They will be his peoples. And God himself will be with them. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Death shall be no more. Mourning and crying and pain shall be no more. For the first things have passed away. And the one who was seated on the throne said, see, I am making all things new. Also he said, write this, for these words are trustworthy and true. Then he said to me, it is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give water as a gift from the spring of the water of life.
very tall person built this. I saw Kara up on her tippy toes. I can't do it for that long. I'm a lot older than you. I can't do it. My name is June, and I have the honor. Okay, here we go already. I have the honor of speaking about Dave. To explain first, it gets a little confusing for people to keep track of who's related to who. And if you're a genealogist, Dave was my brother-in-law. But to me, he was my friend. I'm about to date myself for over 40 years, almost 45. I know it's been that long because Dave dedicated my babies. And while we're speaking of babies, it was 45 years ago when my baby decided to announce in the middle of Dave's sermon at Antioch that he had to go to the restroom, except he didn't say restroom. He said what any 2-year-old would say about having to go in the middle of the sermon. And afterwards, I apologized to Dave. And Dave's answer to me was, never apologize. It is a dear thing, the joyful noise that children bring. That sums up Dave. So I'm not going to apologize for the racket that you're hearing. I'm sorry. But I'm not apologizing. I'm sorry to do that. For everything that's going on. That's the Brinkman crowd, the rowdy grandchildren that I will take responsibility for. But over the years, Dave and I have watched a lot happen. Great stuff, pretty good stuff, amazing stuff, and some sad stuff mixed in there. At one family gathering, Dave was a model of calm and peace. And when I say family gathering, I'm talking chaos, babies, children, gabbing adults, minor dramas that are going on that happen at big family gatherings, because we were a big family that Dave got sucked into. And I asked him how he could stay so calm with all this stuff going on. And he said, well, first it helps that I don't have a clue what's going on. And he said, and secondly, Chris will explain it all to me later. And that's very true, as you all know. And speaking of Chris, you can't mention one without the other. I know you all know what I'm talking about with that. Dave was half of the dynamic duo known as Chris and Dave. They were paragons of hospitality and welcome, whether they'd known you for 45 years or they met you 2 minutes ago. You were sucked into the family. It was a hard and fast rule. Thanksgiving, everybody had to sit at the table. 19 of us once were at a table that went from the dining room through the hallway and into the living room, but we were all at one table. Everybody was together. Neither of them was a better half. They made each other better every day. It was amazing. But a couple things you may not know about Dave that I do. You'd think a lifetime of writing, homily sermons, his history essays, eulogies, wedding vows, christenings, Christmas letters, that he'd be a heck of a writer. And he could write. But Dave had a problem. Dave had a problem with punctuation. And when Dave decided, after he retired 15 years ago, that he was finally going to put Dear Virginia, he was going to put pen to paper, or I should say keyboard to Microsoft document. And he was going to finally put this story down that he had talked to me about and a lot of other people. John and I and Mike, all of us have lived the story of Dear Virginia. And he did get excited about it. And to watch him take on the challenge of writing a novel, not a report, not a eulogy, this is way different for Dave to take on. So I offered to help him edit the story, I guess we could say. It needed to be in his voice, which was very hard, to concentrate on your voice, but he's now writing a novel. And the first 30 pages he sent to me, we were so excited about. And I busted out the red pen, and it looked like I had slipped my carotid artery and bled out on the papers. And I said, okay, I'm going to give this back to you, Dave. And we laughed and laughed. And how many years have we worked on Dear Virginia, and he never got any better. And I tried. I'm a former teacher. He never got any better. But the story did, and that's what was important. We had a great deal of fun, and we're like this close to book 2. Book 1 has been out on the table, but the joy in that process was amazing with Dave to be able to do. Another thing about Dave that I don't think you mentioned, and it kind of speaks to Dave's view of the world to me, the way I think of it, that the man loved to take the long way. The man liked back roads, the roads less traveled, and he took them in no hurry. And this became a family joke with us, that you never asked Dave for directions. Because, see, they're nodding with me. You did not ask Dave for directions because you were going to get a really long trip out of it, the simplest thing you want to do. And he had an internal rule that if you went the back roads to get somewhere, you had to take different back roads to come back. Am I right? If you've been with Dave on a trip, that was just one of his things that he had to do. And it always took a while. Years ago, from Antioch, from their home in Reston to our home in Massanutten, Virginia, was a 2-hour trip, fairly easy. With Dave, it was at least 4. How long did it take you guys to get to Canada for Grey Rocks? A day, days. It took days. It was an adventure. It was a trip, but you never ask Dave for directions. That was all part of him. You may also not know that Dave was a magician, and I'm going to tell you a story about that. It's to tell that story, and what I mean by that, I need to tell you about an important person in my life. She was my Aunt Aggie. Family knows who she is. She was also my godmother. She was a survivor of polio at 2 years of age with one leg and foot much smaller and weaker than the other one. She persevered through the Depression, World War II. She didn't marry till her mid-40s. She couldn't have kids of her own, so she adopted a couple and raised them. She was an amazing person and a big role model in my life. Genuinely tough, independent, half-Irish survivor. That might explain a lot, the half-Irish part. And then she faced the universally horrifying battle with dementia that too many of us are familiar with. And eventually she was placed in a full care facility near her daughter who lived in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, just up the road a piece. And a pattern was set that whenever I could, I'd come to Baltimore, be spoiled by the hospitality of Chris and Dave, and run up to Chambersburg to visit my aunt. And she no longer remembered who I was after a while. And at one time on a gorgeous fall day, I was here to go see my Aunt Aggie, and I looked at Dave and I said, "Hey Dave, you want to take a backroads trip up to Chambersburg? And I'm going to see my Aunt Aggie, and maybe on the way back we'll stop in Gettysburg and soak up a little history, maybe have some lunch." Well, this is like candy to a child. To offer to Dave to take the back roads of Pennsylvania in the fall, it was gorgeous, and to stop in Gettysburg, more history, and then of course he knew the best place to eat, because Dave knows all the good diners and little restaurants and places to go to. So we went off on this trip, and we got to the facility, and I asked Dave, I said, if you want, they have a great lounge. You can wait in the lounge. I'll visit Aunt Aggie. She always gets tired within 20 minutes or so. So then we can continue our trip. And he said, "Oh, heck no. I'm going with you. I want to see Aunt Aggie." He'd only met her once, years before, but of course he heard me talking about her. So we stopped at the nurse's station and we checked in on any news on her, and they said she just finished a little walkabout for exercise and now she was resting her eyes. That's what she always said. She needed to rest her eyes, and she was in her bed. So we went in her room and I prodded her awake, and if you're familiar with it, the litany of who I was, who my mom was, who my siblings were, to try to help and remember who I was, and she didn't. And so I told her that I brought a friend along, and I introduced her to Dave. Next thing I know, abracadabra, Dave has a chair beside her bed, and her hand in his, and the two of them are chattering and gabbing like they've long-lost friends, that they hadn't seen each other in a while. My 93-year-old Aunt Aggie was the most animated, bright-eyed, engaging that I had seen her in a long time. My jaw was on the floor, and that says a lot if I get gobsmacked and don't talk, as the family will attest. I just watched. Caregivers came to the doorway. What's going on in there? You know, listen to what Aggie's saying. And she was just so pleased that a young, handsome man had come to visit her. There's that Irish part. But after 20 minutes, it was obvious her energy started to wane, and Dave said that he had to go soon, but asked if he could say a prayer for her. And she said, of course, she could use all the prayers she could get, but only if she could give him a blessing in return. So Dave said, as Dave says, a very gentle, tender, thoughtful prayer. And Aunt Aggie thanked him and said, well, here's your blessing, young man. And then she recited the classic Irish blessing. Sorry about that. It's actually an ancient Celtic prayer that says, may the road rise up to meet you. May the wind be always at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face and the rains fall soft upon your fields. And until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of his hand. And she patted Dave's hand and said she'd hoped he'd come back to visit tomorrow, but she had to rest her eyes now. Needless to say, we were all blubbering messes, and we quietly left her room, and that was magical Dave. I'm gonna miss that magic very much. Thanks.
Most of you don't know me. My name's Dwayne, and you knew him as Reverend or Pastor Dave. I knew him as Uncle Dave. And I would have to say that the thing that I most want to share with all of you about my memories of Uncle Dave is how he's influenced my life. You know, each and every single one of us has influence on other people. Everybody that we touch, right? And those people, everybody that we touch has influence back to you. And it's up to each of us as to whether or not those influences are positive or negative. And I would have to say that Uncle Dave was not the most influential person in my life. He was second. His brother, my dad, was number one. But it was a close second. And out of everything that I ever was proud about, with Uncle Dave, every time I saw him with people, he had those influences. You know, it was like ripples in a pond, right? And he was right at the center of all of that because he was radiating out all of this positivity to everybody constantly. And that influence shows in all of you here in this room today. That influence is what drew you here, his positivity. And that makes me so proud to be his nephew. You know, he touched a lot of lives. And, you know, the family, you know, I know how big, you know, part of your lives he was. Because I didn't spend nearly as much time as you did with him, but he had that kind of an effect on me. I live in San Jose, and I had to be here today because of that influence. And I hope that each and every single one of us, as much as it hurts to know he's gone, he's not really gone, because his influence lasts on in each and every person that he touched. And as long as we remember that, that is really his version of immortality, right? And that's what each and every single one of us needs to carry forth. You know, Uncle Dave was the youngest of 4 kids, youngest of 4 boys, all right? You know, poor grandma and grandpa, you know, with those kids growing up together. My dad was number 3, and growing up, Uncle Dave and my dad was Robert, and of course, growing up, everybody knew him as Bobby. Bobby, which always cracked me up as a kid, you know, hearing my dad being called Bobby by my Uncle Dave. But they grew up, and they were very, very close. And to hear them talk about it when we got together, it always seemed to swirl around the fact that the 2 older boys, Myron and Eddie, were always getting in so much trouble that Dad and Uncle Dave had to pair up, you know, just to protect themselves and weather, you know, what was going on because of Myron and Eddie, you know, the stuff that got stirred up. You know, of course, I'm number 2 of 4 kids, and I understand how the younger siblings can sometimes exaggerate some of those things. So I'm not sure exactly how much of that was really truth and how much of it was truly trouble, right? But Dad and Uncle Dave grew up very, very close, and that lasted as long as my dad was alive. And I think a lot of it was that they had very similar personalities, and they had a lot of similar positive traits. And it's all things that influenced me in how I wanted to be as a person, as a man. And looking back, I think that they grew into those positive traits and into that positivity and that compassion and that love for people because of how they were raised, you know, what their family environment was. You know, Grandma and Grandpa definitely loved everybody. They grew up in a church and the whole bit. But they also, as a family, they had what I would call a rich experience as a family. Not rich in the financial sense, because in fact, it was quite the opposite growing up. But because of the adversities that they faced as a family together, I think that they had a wealth of experience together. And that wealth of experience included things like spending every summer at scout camp. And the boys would be, you know, sharing tents and whatnot with complete strangers, you know, from other troops, because Grandma and Grandpa were actually running the camp. You know, they were working the camp while they were all there. And learning how to deal with all of those new people coming in. And of course, you know, not all scouts are on their best behavior at all times, right? And especially in a stressful environment for some of them, you know, being away from family and the whole bit. Dad and Uncle Dave had to learn how to deal with a lot of that. And at one point, when Uncle Dave was very, very young, and my dad wasn't that much older, the family found themselves homeless, and they had to go live in an orphanage. And what they did was Grandpa and Grandma took jobs in the orphanage because it gave them room and board, right? But what that meant was the 4 boys had to live in the dormitories with the orphans. Because of the age differences, of course, you know, they all got separated, and my dad and Uncle Dave spent a bit more time together. You can imagine being thrown into a situation like that, where you've got kids who are without parents, right? And that feeling of abandonment and all of the other issues and whatnot that come come with being an orphan and living in an institutional environment, that's rough, right? And a lot of those kids have problems that they deal with, behavioral problems and issues. Dad and Uncle Dave had to coexist in that, and with the knowledge, those other kids had that, hey, you're not orphans. You guys are here, but you're not orphans. You're not like us. You're not going through the same kinds of things. I think experiences like that taught Uncle Dave and my dad a lot about human compassion and patience and understanding and the need to reach out and help those who most need help. Regardless of how they're acting, regardless of how much pain they may be expressing towards you, they need that help. That's a call for help, right? And my dad and Uncle Dave both shared that ability to speak to just about anybody. You go to the store and Uncle Dave or my dad would be sitting there talking to a complete stranger. And they had this knack for listening and paying attention to those folks, right? About hearing not just what was said, but what was not said. And seeing the pain behind some of the things that they saw in those people. And neither one of those men could just let it rest. They had this sense of obligation that if they saw somebody in true need, they needed to do whatever they could to help those people. And it was done out of compassion and love and empathy and a sense of hope, Because growing up, they didn't have it all, easy all the time, right? They saw that bad times never last forever, right? As bad as something could be, if you kept working, you kept hope, you kept strength, you kept together, things would get better. And they wanted to help everybody else see that along the way. They really did. And I think if there was ever a profession that was custom built for Uncle Dave, it was being a pastor. And I love what you said, Bob, about being a pastor rather than being a minister, right? It was all about feeding and caring for his congregation and for those who needed that help. And I think that seeing Uncle Dave in action as a pastor for the first couple of times, it was long after I'd met him and spent time with him. I could totally see how that was the perfect job for him, the perfect profession, the perfect calling. Because it wasn't just his job, that was who he was. And he really believed in living that calling. And he was on call 24/7. When anybody in the congregation needed help, Uncle Dave was always there. No matter how tough the crisis was, he was there to help support, right? My dad, well, first of all, they grew up together. They were extremely close. My dad went and joined the Navy, and during that time when he was in the Navy, Uncle Dave met my mom in youth group in Union Avenue, church in St. Louis. They actually dated a couple of times. But when my dad got out of the Navy and came back, Uncle Dave introduced my parents. So I have to say, Uncle Dave is probably responsible almost as much, for me being here as my parents. So I thank him for that, right? But they had a bond like I haven't seen, amongst brothers in a long time. They were that close. And when my dad got sick when I was in high school, he got a very rare illness. And at the time, it was like 80% mortality rate. And he almost died. He was in intensive care for like 4 weeks and just rapidly going down. And one of his doctors heard about this new trial drug that had not been approved yet, and they tried it out, and it was like an almost instantaneous turnaround. But it created a lot of difficulties. There was some brain damage involved. And my dad was actually the first person that ever had that illness to go back to the same job that he had before he had that illness. So it was one for the record books. But Uncle Dave flew out, and he was with us. I could see on his face that he was hurting just as badly as I was, right? He found a way to compartmentalize that grief that he was experiencing to help me. And I tell you, that meant more to me than anything else in the world. His selflessness in doing that, and I know that he's done it with many of you. Several years later, when my dad passed away, it was the same story. Uncle Dave flew out. And of course, by that time, my relationship with my dad had changed significantly. We worked together, we commuted together. My dad had become my best friend. I took it very, very hard. And Uncle Dave helped me through that. And he was hurting just as badly as I was. But that's who he was. That's not how he behaved. That's not how he acted. That's not how he was trained in seminary to be. That was who he was to his core. And I think that more than anything, that selflessness that he had, his empathy for others, his ability to hear not just the things people were telling him, but the things that they weren't telling him. He had a way of understanding where they were hurting and how they were hurting and what kind of help they needed. And regardless of how bad things were, how bad the world is and the whole bit, Uncle Dave had this gift for finding a shining light, a hope, and phrasing it in terms for each and every one of those people that was hurting, that mattered to them. I don't know how he did it, but he could tell what kind of encouragement, what kind of hope that person needed to hear. And he helped them hear it in a way that they believed it, and they walked away feeling much better and knowing that they could get through whatever challenges they were facing, because there is that hope, right? And I would have to say, more than anything, that's how I want my uncle to be remembered. As one who inspired hope and lent that helping hand to everybody he met that needed it. No matter how tired he was, no matter how much grief he was in on his own, that was his purpose in life, was to help other people and to give them hope. Uncle Dave and I had a lot of conversations, politics, history, love, you name it. One thing that we shared was an admiration for the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. Coming up just Monday, right? One of King's quotes that mattered a lot to both of us was, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness, Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. And as I leave you here today, I know many of you are hurting with the loss of Uncle Dave. But I think that knowing him and how he always liked to inspire hope, I think that he would paraphrase and add on another verse there. Despair cannot drive out despair. Only hope can do that. And my Uncle Dave was all about inspiring that hope, finding that hope, inspiring it, and helping others to see it so they did not despair. So as much as it hurts to lose Uncle Dave, Reverend Dave, as many of you know him, I hope all of you find that hope that he would have given you and inspire in you, and walk away from here today remembering all of that positivity that he always loved to bring around, and know in your heart that's what he would want for each and every one of us here, remembering him today. Thank you.
Hello. Hello. Good morning. I'm Michael Gordon Caldwell. I am my father's oldest son, and I am proud to be here. I didn't write down what I wanted to say because I knew that the journey would write itself for me. And when you said that he was an editor, I looked at June and John and was like, oh my. He was the editor of what? And as Dad would describe his problem, is he was dyslectic. Not dyslexic, but he was dyslectic. And that was Dad, right? He made up words, and he owned them, and you believed them. A lot of people have been asking me how I'm doing. And I'm going to try and be Dad and tell you I'm doing good. I got to spend the week with my wife and my brother. And I got to have memories. And I got to see my family this week. And I'm in church. And you're here. And that's because of him. There's a difference between religion and faith. And he was a man of faith. Religion is about what you were supposed to do, that somebody told you you were supposed to do. And he was always drawn to the disciples of Christ because it didn't have those rules. There was no hierarchy. You could gather with loved ones and celebrate. And you got restored and had communion every week because it was important to renew your body and your soul. But not just every week, every day. He was a man of discipline. Some would call it routines. You could go for a visit, but at 7:30, he was going upstairs. It didn't matter if you were still there. Do not call at 5 o'clock. That is when it's editorial time with John. Do not call during dinner because that's NBC News, Tom Brokaw time. But I've begun to see it as discipline. Things that he practiced over and over until he got it right. And I'm sure he encouraged you to come to church if you knew him as Pastor Dave, but I'm also sure he never made you feel less than if you didn't. You may have walked in here and said, man, it's been a while since I've been in a church, and maybe convinced yourself of the excuses of the reasons why. But he would say, but you're here now on a Saturday, and it's a full church. What else could he want? I mean, he's having fried chicken in a few minutes, so he's getting that too. there are several things that I wanted to make sure I talked to you about today. And one of them is the word that he shared with John and I when we were visiting him in the hospital, and that is onward. He was a man that moved forward, and he found the hope, and he shared it. If he had cancer, if he lost his wife, if he had to sell his home, if he watched his children get married off, he moved onward. And that was what he shared with me. He didn't spend time in the past, although he loved the past. He found a way to live it again and again, in the same tour, again and again and again. But it was all new and wonderful to him. I grew up in Reston, Virginia, and then I grew up when my mom moved back after my parents divorced in 1980 to Columbia, Maryland. Now, don't know that all of you are experts on Reston and Columbia, but if you know of them, you know they are planned communities. They are planned communities by Jim Rouse, and I'm sure his corporation and others, but he gets the headline. And I grew up in those two planned communities. And here's the thing. How many of you have ever been to Reston or Columbia? You didn't have to know it was planned because it was planned for you. You didn't have to know that those roads were laid down and those communities were built with a central church and a pool for gathering and a school. And you didn't have to know that all those pathways were interconnected. And you didn't have to know that the housing was high density and single family to draw folks together so that we could all be one. You didn't have to know, you just had to show up, and it was already there for you. And I've learned from my dad that I don't have to know the plan that's ahead for me. It's already there for me, but I know that the roads I follow, he has helped lay for me. Last weekend, I needed a weekend away. I didn't know how to be fatherless. So I took some time. And I just was going on an adventure with my dog, Lucy. And first thing was first, had to go find pancakes. So I went to Elkton, Maryland, and found some pancakes, because why not? And when I was there, I saw a little sign about a lighthouse that was nearby. So I asked the waitress if it was a good place to go, and she said, "Yes, what are you looking for?" I said, "I don't know, but I have a feeling it's there." And she said it was very peaceful, and so I went. And as I was driving, I started taking some pictures so I could show Kara what I had found. And I kid you not, about a mile from the lighthouse is a road called Caldwell Road. You don't need to know where you're going. Sometimes they literally put it there for you to follow the pathways, folks. It took me to that lighthouse, and it took me to some peace. I've been waiting for my dad to show up since he passed. Longer than I cared that we talked now. So I wanted to hear from him. One of my dad's most disciplined routines that made absolutely no sense was to get the car cleaned before you went on vacation. Absolutely imperative. Not only would he clean it before vacation, he'd get up early, have coffee by himself, and go clean it while we were on vacation. And one of the stories that lives in Caldwell lore is Super Suck. Super Suck was the name of the vacuum that he was cleaning out. I believe it was the 1985 blue 4-cylinder diesel Jeep that you had to plug in before electric was cool. And he fought with this Super Suck machine, and he lost. The galoshes, you know those things that people used to put over their shoes before we just wore different shoes? He lost one. Away it went. I love that story. And yesterday, I knew I was coming here, so what did I need to do? I needed to clean that car. So I went and cleaned that car and got to vacuum out the back, right? Well, I ran into Super Suck's relative, the Super Suck Part 2. And it's interesting. I didn't lose a galosh. I did lose a bracelet. Hematite. Hematite is something that I adore and I wear. I have a bracelet and a ring. You will see neither the bracelet nor the ring. And when I bought that bracelet and that ring in Puerto Rico, the person that sold it to me reminded me that hematite helps ground you, and it helps take your energy that you can't carry, and it takes it for you. And I had told her how I had a blue bracelet that I loved deeply. And one day, after work, getting dressed, just taking off my shirt, it broke and disappeared. And she said, well, that's because when it carries all the negative energy it can, it leaves you. And so yesterday, Super Suck 2.0, I had to get to the back. Dad was always one for pulpits. I was one for more of the front of the classroom. Here's the bracelet. Off my wrist. A man came, the engineer guy came, they looked at the tube, pulled out the tube, they unlocked the thing, they opened it up, and it was nowhere to be found. There were quarters and pennies and other jewelry and paper clips and dust, but that bracelet was gone. But it was okay because I had my ring. So last night I was with my friends. We were having a good time because one of the opportunities from pain comes joy. And so, because of my dad passing, I got to see my friends. This is another gift. And I put my hand on the counter, and it's a great shag glass. And when we were designing the service, one of the things Cal always taught us was if we had a memorial service this morning, we would put my father in that act of finality in small service, but we would have rebirth with all of you, and we would come together and take the next step forward. And I know that that ring and that bracelet are not needed because my father is with me, and my time of grieving is over. It is my time to live. And I know that he would want all of us to live opportunities because that's what we have. Not only are we going to move onward, but we're going to take the opportunities, and I want you to reflect on that for a moment. This week, I found a couple of things that I realized the cycle of life continues. Some of them were really happy. I found a picture of my dad and his fraternity friends. Can't see it, but I'll just narrate. And they're lying on a sofa with a stand-up lamp and some junk food and their jeans. And it's not a red Solo cup, but I'm pretty sure I know what's in that. And it reminded me of a picture of my friends from my freshman year in college. It looks almost identical to that. And then I found a folder that was organized. Now, Grandpa Day was a lot of things, but organized. But this one had photos stacked in it, neat, and it didn't take me long to figure it out. They were black and white. There were folks I hadn't seen, but they had the name Caldwell on them, and they were long parts of our history. And John and I looked at them and saw for the first time our great-great-great-great-grandmother. I don't know if that's related it is. He would remember the detail, but he's not up here, so I'm just going to go with that's what it was. That's what happens when you let me talk. Just like Dad, you just embrace it. Just make it true. It's not a lie if you believe it, Jerry. And what I realized I was holding was the folder from his mother's service. And the very thing that I was doing, he had done before me. He had gathered those photos, and he had preserved them from a time when he had to share with his loved ones. And then I found a photo. It wasn't so joyful. It was a photo of my dad and my grandfather who passed before I was born. My grandfather worked in the hospital, And as you were talking about Dad and Chris as a partner and as a couple, it dawned on me, and as you were talking about our grandparents who worked in that orphanage together, and then my grandmother was a nurse and my grandfather worked in the laundry in the same hospital, and I realized how much they worked together. And in that hospital, the irony being where they both worked, my grandfather had a surgery and he got an infection from that surgery. And I'd heard that story, but I'd never seen the picture in the hospital with my grandfather on oxygen and my dad standing next to him. And my grandfather was clearly near the end. His legs were withered, his body was torn. And it was the same photo you could have taken me 2 weeks ago at Sinai Hospital with my father on oxygen, his body withered. But I'm here to tell you that he was at peace. Because you're all here today because you need a little bit of Dave with you, and he's still here, but I need you to know he was at peace. He was cranky a couple of days, but let's focus on the peace. And he was still Dave. If somebody was coming in to clean the floor, if somebody was coming in to change the bed, if somebody was coming in to take the tray, he was grateful, and he meant it. If somebody would apologize because they were doing something and he was, they were like, I'm so sorry. He's like, it's okay, just do your job, it's fine. He was grateful in the pain. He was gracious. And I want you to think about something. When we talk about opportunity, I want you to think about the opportunities that you had because of my father. I don't know what that is for you. Maybe you're a child without whom my dad had introduced your parents who wouldn't be here. Maybe you're the gentleman yesterday who shared with me the story of you learned how to mop from my dad. It's an important skill. Maybe you're in church because of my dad. Maybe you went to Boy Scouts because of my dad. Maybe you just smiled because of my dad. But there was an opportunity that you had with him that was so powerful, you are here today. One of the things he had was the knack of showing up at the right time. Heard stories from people yesterday that said he just showed up when I needed a prayer. When Kara had surgery, I didn't know he was coming. Just before she went in, he was there to pray. He hadn't talked to me about it. It wasn't very much like him. He always ran things by to make sure it was okay with you, but sometimes he just knew. So here's what I want you to think about. What opportunities have you had in the past 10 days because of my father's death that you wouldn't have had? Maybe you're in Maryland and you belong in California. Maybe you've had an opportunity to meet new ministers. Maybe you've had an opportunity to meet your nephews. Maybe you had a chance to see your friends from college. Maybe you got a chance to spend some time with your daughter before she went back to school. Maybe you've had 3 servings of pancakes this week. Hypothetically. I don't know, but I know you've all had an opportunity this week. And I don't want you to go out and talk about it. I want you to go out and live it. I want you to keep going, keep being. He wouldn't tell you about it, he'd just do it. We need to remember that. There's a third thing I want to tell you about, and I'm going to pull this up and ad-lib until I get there, and that is about being grateful. You know, I'm going to read to you, because I had a feeling I would be up here talking, and I didn't know what I was going to say. Talking to my stepdaughter, Sarah, and I said, I need to write for Grandpa Dave. She said, are you writing to him, for him, or about him? I didn't know I had those choices. I decided to write to him, and I'm going to share that with you. You know, not only did Dad show up in the Super Suck 2.0, but he showed up, in my mind, this morning in the snow. There were some flurries out there. And you know, Dwayne talked about your choice is to take what you want from the interaction, whether it's positive or negative. And you can believe it was my father or not that had it snow. But here's what I know. It was beautiful. It was peaceful. It was cold, and it made me realize I was alive. And I don't really need to know why it was there. But because I have faith and because he was a man of faith, I believe it was my father. And I don't need you to confirm it. Because he was there. Talked a lot about his poetry, and I need to leave you with some of it. That cycle of life, those pictures of friends, those pictures of fathers and children in hospitals, captured in this poem called Once, Now, and Someday, a sonnet for Father's Day. I'm ashamed to say I hadn't read this particular poem. I'm very familiar with Thanksgiving Rising, but I wasn't so familiar with this one until this week. So I had an opportunity to learn that my father wrote another poem. And I'm not real smart, but I think it might be for me. Once your own dad fondly called you son. Of time and love he daily, freely shared. And you just knew, for your dad it was fun to wrap his arms in yours because he cared. Now your own dear child sweetly calls you dad. It helps you to recall what you vowed at the moment of birth when you were glad to pledge daddy deeds, making your child proud. Someday more lads, now dads, will watch with joy their son or daughter living their story, presenting with proud zeal a girl or boy, sensing rightly what gives father's glory, his manly love fulfilling with a kiss our lives, his best, most often blessed wish. Father wrote to me, and I decided to write to him. Dear Pops, he got a kick out of that. It's December 29th, and I haven't talked to you since Christmas Day. I don't know when the next opportunity will come, so I decided to send you a quick note. I have begun to take time each day to identify things I am grateful for, and I wanted to share a few of them with you. One of the things that I was excited about being last is I could avoid stories that other people said. You hit on the voice, I'm just going to repeat it, so let's just pretend it's new, okay? I wrote it down, I can't not say it. I am grateful for your voice, not only its strength and depth, but its quality and compassion. The way you used your voice to teach me to speak up for others that needed to be heard. The advice you shared, like be you, only louder. The stories you used as a way to teach me and countless others right from wrong. For the strength of your voice, I am grateful. One of my favorite stories he would talk about, and again, I may be changing the details, but author's prerogative, of a little boy who wanted a gift for his grandmother. And he lived very far from the ocean. And so he walked all day. And he captured the breeze inside a glass jar. And he spent the night, and the next day he walked back. He was tired and hungry. And he handed that ocean breeze to his grandmother, who also used to love the ocean, but she couldn't travel anymore. She said, "Why do you look so tired?" And he told her what he had done for her. And she said, "Oh, it's such a long journey." And the little boy said, "Long journey is part of gift. And I appreciate your journey to be here today. Showing me the power of love and grace, without which I wouldn't call the Brinkmans and Capels my family. When I was younger, I didn't see all the things you gave up for your family, your move to Maryland to spend more time with me, giving up bad habits such as smoking for 20-something years so you could see John grow up because you wanted to love him more, giving up on your dream of moving to Williamsburg to be a docent, and we found the notes he had been studying. I'm sure he had it all wrong, but he had been studying. So that Miss Chris could finish her career with the company she so dearly loved. I am sure there are other countless examples, but for your sacrifices, Dad, I am grateful. Your love of experiences, racing home from church to watch the team formerly known as the Redskins on TV, but listening to Sonny and Sam on the radio. Trips in our motorhomes, Bobo and Bobo 2. I don't know why we called them Bobo. Florida, Canada, North Carolina, Tennessee, our annual pilgrimage to the conference center at Bethany Beach. I didn't realize how close Bethany Beach was until I drove it for the first time. It's like, did they move it? We used to have lunch and like take rests? So weird. You loved a good cruise, you appreciated time with family, and showed me that memories last longer than any other gift can. For these things I am grateful. Your utter and complete uniqueness, a divorced, drinking, smoking, cursing preacher who wore a peace symbol. The man who went through more automobiles than a used car dealer. I personally remember the yellow Lincoln Town Car, the Crown Vic, the orange Fiat Spider, the blue Jeep, the diesel engine, the Jaguar, big green van, Pearl Cadillac, Datsun, big blue Ford, something or other, and lastly, the green Subaru. Your hats, my goodness, the hats. Cowboy hats, check. Plaid page boy hat, check. Inspector Gadget rain hat, check. Ski hat complete with blue pom-pom, check. Your inexplicable fascination with the Amish, Dad. The number one question I've gotten is, why is there an Amish menu out there? His weekend trips with Miss Chris to the Amish market, which became his discipline, to the point that when she passed and he went and shared that story, they treated him like family and gave that menu as part of their remembrance, because that had become important to their story. From your Amish market trips, your annual trips to Pennsylvania, all the furniture in the house, which is so heavy, I can attest to that. The little wooden knickknacks and the gifts that you would bring back, you were all in. The way you had unique names for things that have become a part of my own common language. Some might call it Neosporin. He called it magic medicine. Some might call it club soda. He called it daddy water. Most people say, I'm full. No, no, no. He would say, I've had an adequate sufficiency. I am grateful that every time I pick up my channel changer, I will think of you. Your wisdom and strength. When Miss Chris died, you showed me strength in how to face the world with kindness, even in the middle of personal pain. I learned from you that from tragedy comes the opportunity for love and compassion and new growth. You found the strength to marry both Kara and I, John and Rob, as the last services you performed, so that we could carry on your traditions of love and family. On December 23rd of this year, John and I came to visit you in the hospital after hours. That was the last time I saw you in person. And for all the optimism, and I know that's what you're supposed to speak up here, I still have some anger for the being asked to leave at midnight on December 23rd/24th, because my father wasn't in bad enough shape for us to be there. We were told it was time to get out, and I said, well, thank you, but I'm staying. And the nurse seemed very confused. And I said, well, I'm going to be with my father tonight. I said, there's a hospital administrator somewhere. You're welcome to call them. My dad used to say it, I'd like to see the manager. They sent in a 20-year-old nurse. Poor thing. I talked to the administrator, and she said, you need to leave or I have to call security. That hardly seems necessary. I looked at my dad, and I said, Dad, what do you want us to do? And he said, don't make a scene. It's time to go. And long before the professionals in that place, he knew that the end of the chapter was coming. In fact, he said to us, the solution does not lie in this institution. The night I came in on the 23rd, it's the night I knew he had found peace. We had a conversation that I'd like to share with you. I walked in and he was in the bed, and he'd been mostly dad, as I said, for you most of the days, but then the last two he'd been fiery and he wanted out. He wanted out to the point he told John and I if we didn't sign him out, he was walking out. He wasn't walking out anywhere, but that's what he was ready to do. But when I came in this time, it was different. First of all, there were doctors and nurses in the room, which was a nice change. But it was too late. And my dad said, it's almost over. And I said, what's almost over, Dad? He said, the race. I said, how does it end? He said, how do you think it ends? You never just answer a question. I said, I was taught that it ends with love and peace. And my father looked at me without hesitation and said, a fine ending for any story. David Arthur Caldwell, I am grateful your story ends in love and peace, for I know you and Miss Chris are back together and will forever be watching over all of us. And for that, we are all truly grateful. I'll share one last poem with you, Thanksgiving Rising. It's the really shortened version, everyone. It's okay. And I may have edited and moved a few lines so it flows just a little smoother for our ears. This was something he'd written for his mother-in-law as an ode and a tribute. We're bringing our family together. It was something he had John and I, the boys. Boy? I see no boy here, but the boys had to read every Thanksgiving. This year we didn't have Thanksgiving in that house. He was in Charlestown. John and Rob spent some time with Rob's family, which they had given up most of the time so they could be together in our large chaos. Kara and I took Dad to Matthew 1600, which is where we were last night to celebrate his life. But I didn't get to read this. So this is my last time with you. Apple and pumpkin pie, cooling icons, a pilgrim's feast. On sideboard groaning with bowls now proudly ready. Olives, beets, and pickles, mashed potatoes galore, Thanksgiving rising. Silver, crystal, plate settings stylishly set. Cutlery and napkins, and rings for each guest. Grandma's smile fills hearts with happy gratitude, rising Thanksgiving. Tables set festively for our feast. Generations bow their heads for grateful grace spoken. Praise the Almighty for our bountiful gifts. Thanksgiving rising. Amen.
privilege to be among this group of people remembering Dave Caldwell. There once was a young pastor, prolific in his writing, one with whom a single encounter would let you know that the world was indeed his oyster. This young pastor was writing back and forth with his theological pen pal when suddenly he went off course from this high-level theological reflection to retelling a story of what had just happened to him. At 11 o'clock, there was a knock at my door, he wrote, and a 10-year-old boy came into my office, and I noticed something was amiss with the boy, who is usually cheerfulness personified, and soon it came out. He said, "Mr. Wolf is dead." The pastor theologian goes on to explain his efforts to try to figure out who Mr. Wolf was, only to learn that Mr. Wolf was this young boy's German shepherd. The boy was distraught. His pastor was trying to sift through this story to get to the heart of this young boy's grief. And eventually their conversation came to the question that every pastor worries about. The boy asked, "Tell me now, when will I see Mr. Wolf again?" Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the pastor in this story, later wrote that he quickly made up his mind and said, "Look, all who loved each other on earth, genuinely loved each other, they will remain together with God, for to love is part of God." Just how that happens, though, we don't admittedly know. In this statement, this young pastor's heart combined with this young theologian's mind, and with delicacy, grace, and compassion, he responded to the need right in front of him. How beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. Every great theologian must have a pastor's heart, and every great pastor must have a theologian's mind. And I believe, as you have heard today, that Dave Caldwell was one of those rare people who was both a magnificent pastor and a thoughtful theologian. In addition to the wise and authentic ways he showed up as a compassionate father, a loving spouse, a curious historian, an experimental poet, and a devout scout leader. I love this story of Mr. Wolf and Dietrich Bonhoeffer because in his retelling of the story, we get a front row seat to the way this great theological mind was weighing what to tell this hurting little boy, the personification of what it means to be a pastor. We get a front row seat to the theological wheels turning in his head when we get a front row seat to the restraint that it took for him to not break out in a theological monologue before this young boy. But most of all, we get an example of how to embrace the mystery of life and death. Bonhoeffer didn't respond to this young boy with empty platitudes. He didn't comfort the child by telling him that everything happens for a reason. He didn't offer false comfort by advising this boy to look for the good. Instead, he embraced this boy's tears, because the tears were welcomed companions on this mysterious journey of life, companions whose wetness reminds us of the baptismal waters through which we pass, waters that do not promise a life of ease, but waters that promise a life of companionship, a life defined by hope and love, not without its pains and struggles, but with people to walk alongside of us, to carry our pain, to hold our grief, and to embrace us in the midst of it all. This journey, yes, it's painful, because it's one in which the good souls seem to leave us too soon. those of our beloveds, those in whom we find refuge and strength, those to whom we look for direction, those who gather us in. Dave Caldwell has gone from our midst. He has entered into the fullness of God, into the embrace of the eternal, into the dance with the divine. And like Bonhoeffer, who stood before the hurting young boy, I cannot claim to know what that looks like. I may not know the answers to the questions you carry into this room. I may not know the depth of hurt that some of you know after journeying with Dave for decades. But I have my own questions I carry into this place. Tell me, oh God, about this new heaven and new earth. Tell me about when you will wipe away every tear. Tell me about this time when death will be no more, because this grief, this emptiness, this looking at Dave's same old pew right back there, and to not see him in it is hard. Like Bonhoeffer, we all stand before the face of death, broken and befuddled by the mystery of it all. But here's one thing I do know. In life and in death, we belong to God. There is nothing, no height, nor depth, nor rulers, nor thing presence, nor things to come, nor powers, nor anything in all of creation, nothing that can separate us from the love of God that we see best in the extravagant welcome to the table that is the center of our worship as disciples of Christ. Frederick Buechner reminds us that to live is to leave. In the gospel story, we're reminded that our calling is to sow seeds for the pure joy of sowing seeds, knowing that they will likely be reaped by others if anything grows at all. Leaving is a part of life that, though it may be challenging and carry with it a load of grief, it also leaves us with gifts and graces and fingerprints of the departed. Reminders of their presence. Reminders of their lives forever tied to ours. And Dave certainly knew the joy of sowing seeds. The irony, of course, for those who knew him well, is that he had two brown thumbs, incapable of tending to plants, with the one exception of the peace lily from Chris's funeral that Betty Moore will now care for. We here at Christian Temple and far beyond in the capital area will long be reaping the fruit of Dave's work. We will long be recipients of more gifts and graces than we deserve, in large part because of the sweat, love, work, tears, and devotion of both Dave and Chris Caldwell. Gifts and graces that will serve as reminders of their lives forever tied to ours. To live is to leave. But in every ending, there is a beginning. In every leaving, there is an entering, because time is like that. We can learn from the Celtic people in the way they approach time. For them, time was not separate from eternity. You didn't live in finite time, die, and then enter into eternity. Rather, time and eternity were woven delicately together in a tapestry of beautiful colors and strands that left no one behind and no strand unloved. A tapestry begun long before one life began and continues long after life ends. Friends, today we celebrate the life of David Arthur Caldwell, a servant of God, a seeker of wisdom, and lover of all good things. Time may appear to us as linear, but it is actually a circle of eternity, not in an entirely separate location, but right here among us. Dave Caldwell has long been enjoying the rich tapestry of eternity. And finally, he gets to wrap himself in this tapestry of divine love, enjoying the fullest participation in the life of God that he could have ever imagined. And for that, we thank God. Let us pray. God of life and death, beginnings and endings, arriving and leaving. We find ourselves today in the middle space, the space between life and death. We find ourselves today grieving the loss of Dave Caldwell, yet seeing reminders of his liveliness everywhere. We come today with sadness and grief, overtaken by the thought that Dave's physical presence is no longer with us, yet we also come with hope and joy, seeing the faces of beloved friends who have long loved Dave, Chris, Michael, and John. It is only through your presence, O God, that we can hold seemingly opposite emotions together, negating neither and loving us through all of the emotions that come our way. We thank you for the life of Dave Caldwell, for his tenacious hope, for his love and faithfulness to the church, for his unending pursuit of friendship and goodness, and most importantly, O God, for his love for his family. We humbly ask that you would envelop all who loved him, but especially John and Michael, with your peaceful presence. May they know your presence through each and every person gathered here today. May we all be a physical embodiment of the love and grace you offer to each person. And as the days pass, as the memories of this day fade, may the memories we all hold of Dave remind us of his presence that lives on in each person he loved. Though the pain is very real and the grief is fresh, we know, O God, that your love remains. Your love and presence has sustained us through many difficult times, and we know that it will continue to sustain us all in the days, weeks, and months that come. Surround each person here with your unfailing love. Remind us of the hope of resurrection, and may that hope give us courage and strength to face the days ahead. And strengthen us, O God, in the knowledge that we do not face them alone. In the name of Jesus Christ, the risen one, we pray. Amen.